Hello, Mark. Another episode of True Business Stories.
And it's just you and me looking at each other with our guest on the phone from Sydney.
That's right. But another interesting fact is that do you realise that we've been going 12 months?
It feels not like yesterday, doesn't it?
So that means we're very nearly up to episode 52.
It is.
And what we're going to do is we're going to get a colleague of ours, a communications lady, who is going to come and act as the facilitator and quiz you and I over our 12-month journey and the stories we've told and the lessons we've learnt.
Look forward to it.
Good. Well, I'm really looking forward to today because we have Emily Sin on the phone from Ray White in Sydney, but Emily is the CEO of Property Management in Australia for the whole organisation.
Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
So tell us the Emily story. Where did you go to school? Where was primary school?
Well, I grew up in the lovely suburb of Baymorris in Victoria, and but when I hit grade 5, my father became very unwell, and so we moved to the country. And we'd always had a property in country Victoria, but we moved to a smaller one in a place called Kilmore so that we could continue going to school. And so I finished really high school, and finishing school was at Assumption College in Kilmore.
Okay, very nice part of the Victorian country too, Kilmore.
Yeah.
No,
my family still live there.
Okay, cool.
It's a great school too. That's the other issue about Kilmore. That school has a great reputation.
Big reputation.
And I remember as a schoolboy I used to play football against them, and I think they might have beaten us.
They did have it did have a reputation as a football school, and I was only, I think, the third year of girls in that school. So traditionally a boys' boarding school, but now it's co-ed boarding.
Excellent.
Anyway, I finished there.
And where did you go from there? When you finished high school, where did you head off to?
Well, it was that was actually probably the first really big cliff for me to jump off, because I was in a situation where financially my parents were compromised, and I was living in country Victoria, and there weren't many opportunities there. So I really had to make my way back to Melbourne, which is where I'd spent my primary school years, and find a job, really. I got into university, but I couldn't really afford to go to university and live away from home. And I got into TAFE, but I couldn't really afford to do that either. So, and it was very limited career advice at school in my time. So I had to get a job, and I was so lucky. I landed on my feet with a company called McPherson Real Estate in Camberwell, and they just happened to be next to the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. And at that time, it was a very career orientated role. There was a lot of training and support and career development, and I happened to work with a company that had very strong leadership. So I really am grateful for a good start in that regard.
That's really interesting how where Bill and I talk about sliding door moments, or where you could go left and go one way, go right, go another, and that's your sort of sliding door moment, isn't it? You land there and you happen to be in the right location. The first one, yeah. That's amazing. That's fantastic.
So it could have easily, I mean, with real estate, as you know, it could have been anything. So yes. I really was lucky to have strong leadership and people that they were hard but fair.
And wanted to train people, which is fantastic.
But you moved on, Emily, you moved on from there to a couple of other agencies, didn't you, in the Melbourne area?
I did. Yeah. I spent 10 years in Melbourne all up, and ultimately which I loved. I love Melbourne. I wish I could live in Melbourne. I much prefer it to Sydney.
Don't say that too loudly.
But ultimately, Melbourne's a lovely city. It's very transient here in Sydney. But ultimately what happened was back in those days, you worked 6 days a week. Yep. So I've been working 6 days a week for the first 10 years of my career. So therefore I was pretty good at what I did, and I didn't realise that in Melbourne because everybody was really good. But I was finding it hard to get a senior role, which at that time was something like a department head, because Melbourne was small and those roles were tightly held. So the opportunity for me to move to Sydney came up with a boyfriend, and we took that opportunity, moved to Sydney, and found out very quickly that it was a big town. It was transient. I hated it, and I couldn't find a company that I enjoyed working with. So I just consulted for the first year. It was hugely unprofessional, really limited legislation in my field of property management, no kind of career-orientated approach to it, lack of leadership. But after 12 months, I found a company called McGrath. And at that time, John McGrath was spending a lot of time on television on the Sunrise show in the morning.
Yep.
So had a bit of a star status around it. And I fortunately met a recruitment person that said to me, listen, you just need to go work at McGrath. That's the only place for you here. And we happen to do the recruiting for them, so we'll get you an interview. And they didn't really have a role for me, but I took the interview and they made a role for me. So again, I had to kind of go through the trenches for the first 12 months, but eventually I found where I needed to be, and I had a great time there for about 4 years before I got the opportunity to join Ray White and move out of property management and become more of a business coach.
That's fantastic.
Look, and I know you're strong on leadership. I know that from, and that you made a great reputation for yourself. But also, I remember in between where you are now, you actually became your own real estate agency. Is that correct? With Ray White? Was it with Ray White?
I did. It was Ray White. It was Ray White Balmain.
Mm.
And that was that was after I'd had some time with McGrath, after I'd had some time with the corporate business inside Ray White. An opportunity came up in my backyard. So I was living there in Balmain, and my daughter was just about to go to school, start school there. And it was just like a sign. And that we had always had a business there in Ray White, but it was becoming available. And I thought, I've just got to do it. My father had always said to me, as a good small business owner in Victoria, and an entrepreneur of sorts, work for yourself, have your own business. And I'd had people along the way encourage me to do that, but I'd never really had the courage. But Ray White's quite an amazing company, and they supported me into doing that. So that was the next big leap, really, off a cliff.
Well, that was a bold move, Emily, for you to do that at that stage, and that's Mark sliding doors again. See,
it was.
That's what that was. And just by the way, when I was trying to research on the internet, I found an old piece from Rate My Agent. And,
oh, really?
And
oh, my God, this could be embarrassing.
And no, Balmain was top of the list. Your agency was on top of the list. Now, I don't know where I found that from. Right.
Well, we were pretty good. I mean, we were only there. I was in agency for about 5 years, and I had every intention of staying there. It was a slow start. There was a lot of baked beans for the first few years, and Annabelle had started school, so it's pretty. I was a single parent at that time as well, so it was pretty tough but exciting time. And it was about year 3 that business really kicked, and I started to make some money. And year 4, I kind of couldn't believe it. I was thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. Why didn't I do this earlier? I've had 15 years before I've done this, and why did I wish I'd had the courage to do this earlier, because that was the only thing that had ever held me up from doing it, was courage. And in year 5, Ray White, or the family that owned Ray White, the White family, reached out to me and said, could you come back in and run property management for us, because Ben White's going to step out and revolutionise the property management industry with new technology? And I said, no, thanks. And they kind of didn't leave me alone. I didn't realise it was a rhetorical question. I thought I had the decision-making powers, but ultimately I said, okay, well, if my business sells in 30 days and I get the price that I want, and you pay me what I want to be paid in this new role, then I'll come back into corporate and I'll do that. Anyway, it all just happened easily. It sold within 2 days. I got a price above what I wanted. I had my premises organised, and my team were all happy in their new roles. So it was just easy, and I did it. And looking back, I can say that was a good decision. That wasn't the hardest decision I've had to make, because being a small business owner is tough.
Yep.
It's really tough, and it's one of the things I enjoy the most in this role is supporting our small businesses, because it can be really lonely, especially as a leader. And we've got 500 rent rolls in our group, so there's a lot to do and a lot of people to support.
So as a realist running your own agency, was that 7 days a week, Emily?
Yeah, it was 6 days a week in terms of being dressed and ready to go.
Yep.
But the day 7 or after hours, if a client calls to say, okay, we're ready to list, or we've got a question, you take the call, because Balmain was such a competitive environment. That taught me a lot too. It's a blue chip suburb in Sydney.
Yeah,
it's a highly sought after market. In fact, I've just bought a house there. It's really hard to get into, and as you can imagine, the agencies are excellent.
Yep.
So my competitors were excellent, and so for that environment, insisted on being 7 days for sure.
Listen, we'll come back to this later, but just a quick question, because Mark and I are sitting here in my home office in Geelong. So what's the Ray White Group looking like in our area down here, Geelong, the Bellarine and Surf Coast?
Well, it's a bittersweet story for us in your area. We've got a great business at Lara. Joe and Zach Boothroyd run that business. We've had a strong business in the past, a couple of strong businesses in the past in Geelong, but right now at the moment we're not represented there, which is a bit of a black mark against our name.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you've got Ray White's reputation is far-ranging. I didn't realise you weren't in Geelong. That's interesting.
But it's very competitive down here, and it's very close, and it's a little bit of who you know, what you know down here.
Oh, always. And Ray White's the largest brand in Australia, and it has the most amount of offices and space and market share. So our footprint is very strong. But Victoria is an interesting market for us, because it's really dominated by independents.
Yep.
And you probably see that in Geelong as well. Like although we're the largest brand in Victoria and we outrun Barry Plant or O'Brien's or anybody like that, our competition in Victoria are the independents, really.
Yeah, and there's lots of family-owned independents that have been around a long time. Yeah, interesting.
Now, Emily, you're in this leadership role. How many people are you responsible for?
In my current role today?
Yes, yeah.
There's 13 people in my team nationally, so all around Australia, and we're represented in South Australia and Perth as well. So my title is Chief Executive of Property Management for the Ray White Group. So that's really a strategic role, and we've just expanded the team actually into 2 teams. One, which is our Ray White ALO rollout team, and we're rolling out new technology through our group at the moment. And the other team is our national property management team. So probably combined, there's about 15 people in those teams supporting 200,000 properties under management and 496 rent rolls.
All right. Now that leads us into one of our standard questions for anyone in the role of leadership. What is your leadership style? And if we went and spoke to your direct reports, how would they describe you as a leader?
And remember, they may listen to this.
First of all. Well, I know how I describe myself, but I'm not sure how they describe
Well, you describe it yourself. We'll give you a free rein.
I think I'm pretty tough. I was explaining that yesterday. I'm pretty tough. I've got high expectations. I only learnt late in life that not everybody's the same as me, which has been a hard lesson for me to learn.
I haven't learnt
but
that lesson yet, by the way.
But I'm fair. I'm also very fair. I can be very empathetic, and I find it really easy to put myself in somebody else's shoes. And I think that really helps me as a leader. And I talk to women all the time about being emotional, and emotional being their superpower, because it allows us to be a little bit more vulnerable, particularly in real estate. And you'll see so many successful females in real estate because they're able to connect with people, I think, a little easier because they are emotional. And I like to talk about that because I think in the past that's probably the thing that holds women up from having a seat at the board table. Men find it difficult to deal with emotional women, and we are emotional. And women, I think, in the past have thought that they need to be unemotional to be successful, to get a seat at the table. So that's certainly where, when we talk about female leadership, I try to support the balance of power and support women, because I think that's really, as I said, it's a superpower if you can harness it.
Well, have you seen the industry change, Emily? Has it if I think back to my very first house many years ago in renting, it tended to be the junior role was dealing with rentals, and the bloke that pulled up in his brand new BMW was the guy who was the salesperson. There was very few women in the sailing side. Is that changed? Is that evolving?
Which I don't think it. I think the conversation is evolving, but if you look at the statistics inside Ray White, it's embarrassing. Only 5% of our leadership in Ray White are women. And so that's, okay. I share that number only to, confess our sins, and say that we know that, we're aware of it, and we're working on it, because there's a lot more women represented in real estate, but from a leadership point of view, it's still quite low.
Oh, and interesting.
I'm one of 3 female CEOs in a group of about 10.
And what do you think the barrier is, Emily? What stops people getting through and getting to where you are, your sort of role?
I think it's a combination of things. It's no one thing that we can fix. Okay. I think certainly the timing of having children can be a disadvantage, or it can be an advantage. If you get that right, then if you get the timing of having children and maternity leave right, then it can't, it may not affect your career, but sometimes it does.
Yep.
Certainly as a female selling agent, real estate agent, that is a huge challenge because, and I spoke to someone recently outside of our group about this, because when you're not on the tools and when you're not actually in the market, then people still need to sell their home, and they'll speak to who is available in the market, and regardless of whether you're having a baby or not. So I think that's definitely a challenge, and I think having emotionally mature men is an important piece for leadership. Because whilst we may have male leaders, certainly you can add the element of post-COVID and needing to understand people's well-being a lot more than what we have in the past. Goes to the same point about understanding how female leaders work, and female leaders need to understand males.
Yep.
Just on that theme, Emily, we spoke very briefly before we came on air. You're involved in a group along those lines with females in real estate. Can you tell us a bit about that?
We have a group inside Ray White which we call Leading Ladies, and it's very much about telling each other, sharing our stories with each other on how we've become successful. So we look to successful selling principals, successful selling agents, successful property managers, anyone in our group who has been able to break the mold and become, amongst the best. And we really try and share the journey that they've been on, and because there's often learnings for our younger females about how they can navigate their career forward. And you truly do have to navigate it, more so perhaps than a male, because you have to pick your timing, and I think females have to do a little bit more of articulating what it is that they want. I'm not sure we're great at that either.
Interesting.
I just want to change track for a minute. Being very busy in your professional occupation, tell us about your weekends. How do you relax and where do you go? Or what do you do?
I'm pretty good at relaxing.
Yeah.
And I'm very good at not answering the phone. I think I've managed that really well. So I don't get bothered on the weekend typically, and I think that's because I've just never been available on the weekend, and it doesn't hurt my reputation at all. So I think everybody should be empowered around controlling their time. But I do. So I have Annabelle, who's now 14 going on 15 in year 9. And Tom has 2 children, Edie and Gus, who are similar in age. Edie's doing year 12 this year. So our first child going through year 12, 10th time.
Good luck.
But we, during COVID, we got a little bit like everybody. We went a little bit mental. But we have some friends that bought boats and beach houses and all sorts of things, gave up jobs, marriages ended. But we bought a little farm, which is west over the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, in the Central West, at a little tiny place called O'Connell. And we started going there on the weekends, and I went back to my childhood roots of riding horses.
Fantastic.
And we spend our time doing that on the weekends. So that I found that really helpful, because during COVID, obviously property management was on the front line, one of the front lines.
Yep. And
I was just struggling to stop thinking about work all the time. So I decided I needed a hobby, and my children, raising Annabelle, had been my hobby really for the last 10 years. But once she sort of became 12, she was off my hands a little bit more, and I had a bit more headspace. So I quickly filled it with horses. And it's actually been a way bigger commitment than I expected. Thought I knew everything. I don't. We spend our time doing that now, which has been great in terms of keeping Annabelle off the streets and attached to her family, but I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to hold that back.
Well, but it's good to have that escape, though, isn't it? That's, as you say, you've got to clear your head, and that's a very good way of doing it.
Yeah, Emily, Mark.
And it's quite remote. It's quite remote. I try not to talk to anyone.
Mark and I belong to a private directors group in Geelong, which I started probably, 13 years ago, Mark?
13 years ago.
When we have meet for breakfast once a month and, pour our hearts out to each other, but primarily we're supposed to talk about being better directors of companies. But one of our
that's the point. That's exactly what you do. It's great.
One of our members, she got 2 daughters, really into horses in a big way, and Michelle is fully engrossed in it outside of work. But she bought a truck with a big unit on the back. And then she went and got herself a heavy driver's license so she could drive it. And now she was telling us at breakfast last week, she said to her husband, who's a plumber? Electrician, said, I want you to put a shower and a toilet in my truck for me now, because they're spending every weekend in it.
So Pony Club takes over.
I kind of understand, Michelle, I think I'm a little bit jealous. I don't have a truck, but I do have a float, and I have had to upgrade my car so it can tow a horse float. That's what happens. Which is, imagine getting that into the King Street car park every day. It's not a challenge. But it's become an obsession. If you're into horses, then you are obsessed about it, because you kind of can't do it half-hearted, or things go wrong. So hence the larger commitment than I expected. But I also find it hard not to do it, and I do love it. I'm not doing as much of it as I'd like to, but certainly when I am in my retirement years, that's what I'd like to be doing, more of that.
So coming back to property management, it's high in the news. Rental levels. I think I saw on the news the other night that the vacancy rates around Australia are less than 2% all around Australia. How's that impacting on you guys in trying to manage it? And my daughter moved up to Brisbane over a year ago, and as she got up there, the floods hit. So she had this perfect storm of trying to find somewhere to rent, and then all these people who'd been flood affected were trying to find places to stay. And she ended up having to stay in a motel at $1,000 a week for 3 or 4 weeks until she could sort herself out and get in a caravan park and then find. But the queues of people trying to go through houses was unbelievable. How you guys handling all that? Is that leveled off a little bit, or?
It goes through stages in different marketplaces. I think certainly what we've seen in places like the Sunshine Coast and Canberra and Brisbane, we've seen it peak to levels where it just hits an affordability ceiling, and you can keep charging rents higher, but there's literally nobody to rent those properties because it's too high. Yep. So that's really the only kind of relief we've seen to any of it. It's a housing crisis. It's about supply and demand. The little known fact really that people don't talk a lot about is during the 2 years of the pandemic, the sales market across Australia-wide, rose in volume by 30% and value in 30%. And that prompted a lot of investors in places like Perth and Canberra, long-held investments with little opportunity of return, they all sold. So we've had a huge exodus of investors in Australia because there's been record market conditions to capitalise on their return. So that's happened, and we've had, obviously, the pandemic substantially slowed our new housing build each year, or our quota. We were building at about 140 to 145,000 new homes annually prior to the pandemic in Australia, and that reduced by about half. And even at 140,000, we weren't meeting the demand. So we're now way behind what the demand is for new homes, and planning is still challenged as it has been for a long time. So there's, people love to ask me and our team, how is this going to end? And I don't know the answer to that because we're going to need some more homes.
I don't think anybody knows that answer. Yeah.
But I can tell you the discussion around finding solutions is looking at things like rent to build, more affordable housing, incentives for developers to have a higher LVR mark. That's in your up your alley around, do your development and we'll give you a higher LVR if you put in a certain amount of affordable housing. So there's lots of fractional investment. There's lots of strategies that you'll shortly hear about, I would say another quarter, and you'll start to hear about people bringing these ideas to the table which will take government policy, state policy, federal policy, all to intervene and change the way things currently are to open it up. But that's what we need to do. We need to open up the type of investment available to Australians and overseas investment to be able to unlock more homes.
And what's your role at Ray White? What's that? And how does Ray White play in this market?
So my role is primarily strategic. So I really look at so at the moment, obviously, everything that we've just been talking about is all the sorts of things I talk about every day. But obviously we came off the back of the pandemic, and in places like your market, we had huge changes a complete change to the Residential Tenancies Act and a huge introduction of compliance into investment properties in Victoria. So that's just the Victorian market. Queensland, for example, has just had minimum housing standards introduced. New South Wales had that. So there's all sorts of different things happening because the state governments don't work together around residential tenancies. In fact, they don't collaborate at all, and that's a huge challenge for us at Ray White, because we're the market leader in every market around the country. So the pandemic was a challenge. Post-pandemic has been a challenge, and we've lost half of our industry. In fact, our numbers are in Ray White. We are managing more properties under management than we did before the pandemic,
Wow.
but with 10% less property managers across the group. So we're also seeing rent rolls consolidate. So there's a trend for smaller rent rolls being, consolidating up into larger rent rolls. So the industry is really in a change environment at the moment. How people look to operate their business is completely under review, and it is unfortunately driven by people. I mean, property management, without a technology change, property management relies on the people in the business, and therefore, that long-held term cottage-style industry, it still is. But what we're doing in Ray White is rolling out new technology for property management. So it's a busy year for us.
Well,
exciting for someone like me.
On that point, we're going to schedule a version 2 of this episode and come back to you in about 3 months' time and finish this conversation, but just see how far all those changes have progressed.
Great. Love to do that.
That would be good, because Emily, thank you. We'll wrap ourselves up now, but I really enjoyed talking to you. You've got a great story, and I think you'd be a bit of an inspiration to women starting out in real estate to hear how to go about it and the way you've gone about it. So congratulations. It's been fantastic.
And I think episode 2, we will give you some time to prepare, and we'll talk about leadership for young women in real estate, and we'll make that a topic of one of our podcasts.
Yep. So thank you very much for your time, Emily.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Bill. I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you.
You.